All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating, the anatomy of liberation. We're going to explore how freedom, well, it's not just a one-and-done event, right? It's a complex, ongoing journey. We'll be moving from those massive historical milestones of freedom on a national scale all the way down to the intensely personal, psychological boundaries we have to draw. And ultimately, we're leading up to the absolute peak of this journey, claiming total personal authorship of your own life. This is going to be incredibly insightful, so let's get into it. So here's a quick look at the roadmap for this explainer. First, we're hitting the history of freedom. 2, frameworks for inner growth. 3, the mechanics of control. 4, reclaiming author identity. And finally, number 5, manifesting professional mastery. As we move through these, you'll see this really powerful narrative unfold about how taking back your power actually manifests in the real, tangible world. Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the history of freedom, a delayed liberation. We're going to anchor our discussion in a crucial historical reality, the story of Juneteenth. This really gives us the foundational context for understanding what it actually means when freedom is delayed, but remains inevitably on its way. You know, we so often think of liberation as instantaneous, like flipping a switch, but the timeline tells a very different story. While freedom was officially declared way back in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation, that just wasn't the reality on the ground for everyone. Because the Union Army wasn't heavily present in remote areas like Texas, the actual lived reality of liberation was forcefully and unjustly delayed for 2.5 years. Freedom wasn't realized there until June 19, 1865. That gap, the space between the Declaration of Freedom and the actual experience of it, is a massive theme we're going to see repeated in our personal lives too. And today, that delayed freedom is celebrated as America's second Independence Day, Juneteenth. What's absolutely beautiful here is how liberation is celebrated through this deep, vibrant cultural resilience. You see it in the traditions, the focus on community, education, and specific cultural staples like red velvet cake, strawberry soda, barbecue. That color red, it is profoundly symbolic. It represents both the immense suffering and the blood shed during enslavement, and at the same time, the ultimate, undeniable triumph of freedom. It's literally a physical manifestation of an incredibly hard-won reality. Moving right along to Part 2, Frameworks for Inner Growth, Lenses of Healing. Now we're transitioning from that grand societal freedom to the pursuit of internal freedom. Because honestly, just as a nation has to navigate its messy history to find true liberation, navigating our own personal trauma requires us to understand how our minds and spirits actually heal and grow. And this brilliantly illustrates how we do that. When we talk about healing and self-awareness, we're often looking at the exact same core human experience just through 3 different lenses: psychology, mindfulness, and spirituality. Psychology, that's all about restructuring the past so you can find mental stability. Mindfulness zeroes in on right now, the present moment, to break those automatic, stubborn habits. And spirituality, well, that connects us to a larger purpose and builds inner frameworks. The thing is, they are all deeply connected. To truly break free from past trauma, weaving these perspectives together gives you a complete, holistic roadmap to self-ownership. But what happens when that path to self-ownership is actively sabotaged? That brings us to Part 3, the mechanics of control, anatomy of abuse. We really need to shift our focus now to the clinical, sobering realities of manipulation. We're going to look at a deeply harrowing personal account drawn directly from our sources, a survivor who navigated 40 years of coercive control, medical gaslighting, and just intense psychological manipulation. First things first, we have to define this clinical reality, because while going through it might literally feel like you're under some kind of dark spell, coercive control is actually systematic psychological conditioning. It's designed entirely to exhaust the target and completely distort their reality. So it's not supernatural in the slightest. It is a highly mechanical, deliberate method of abuse, and it leads to profound hypervigilance and frequently complex PTSD. So the crucial point is really understanding the specific tactics used in this kind of dynamic. Because this isn't just about overt, obvious aggression. It's so insidious. It's persistent boundary testing, like forcing unwanted food or supplements on someone just to wear down their basic right to say no. It's gaslighting, convincing the victim they're crazy or hypochondriacs, which perfectly masks how toxic the abuser actually is. It's intentionally starting fights purely to drain your energy, a concept psychologists call gathering narcissistic supply. And as financial control, undermining the victim's independence and successes just to keep them locked in a state of total exhaustion. But here's the kicker. The dynamic inevitably shifts the second the survivor wakes up and sets firm boundaries.
When that narcissistic supply line is finally cut off, the abuser completely loses control. This leads to an escalation phase known in clinical terms as the extinction burst. Our source material details this perfectly. First, there's a public performance, like calling in fake wellness checks to the police just to humiliate the victim and control the public narrative. Second is hoovering. This is when they try to bypass phone blocks to send a super casual, mundane text like, "Hey, go into Costco, need anything?" just to see if the victim will take the bait. It is a desperate, frantic, final effort to provoke any kind of reaction.
Which leads us to part 4, reclaiming author identity, from survival to truth. Let's transition over to the survivor's internal awakening. This is that incredible moment where the chaotic, painful fragments of a life lived purely in survival mode finally come together into a coherent, undeniable, and frankly, powerful trajectory. Now, what's really interesting about this is the profound distinction here. Flattery feels like decoration. Recognition feels like oxygen. Just think about that for a second. When you've spent your whole life being told your reality isn't real, empty praise, it means absolutely nothing. But having the raw, brutal truth of your survival accurately recognized by someone else, that is active. That validates the actual weight, the sheer texture of the work it took to survive. It literally breathes life, like oxygen, into the survivor's new identity. And this awakening, it typically happens in 7 distinct stages. It starts with a quiet shock when the chaos finally starts to make sense. Then this feeling of being caught, but in a good way, like you're finally being understood, which brings a really powerful duality, immense relief mixed with intense grief for the years you lost. That's followed by that true validation we just talked about, validation without the fake flattery. From there, your past shifts from just being a series of traumatic accidents to a sense of inevitability, a deliberate trajectory. And that forces a massive identity shift. You realize you have the absolute authority to speak your truth right now. Finally, stage 7, empowerment. You stop apologizing. You realize your trauma wasn't just some sealed container you have to hide. It was actually a pressure engine forging your incredible power. And that brings us to this incredibly powerful statement from our sources. This right here, this is the voice of absolute ownership. The survivor explicitly stopped accepting those sanitized, AI-polished versions of her life. She completely refused to let her story be diluted just to make other people comfortable. Because it's not about looking back with regret or making excuses. It is about standing entirely, uncompromisingly in the authority of 30 years of execution, survival, and pure mastery. Let's move to part 5, manifesting professional mastery, the brand unapologetic. Internal liberation is incredible, obviously, but how does it actually show up in everyday life? Well, we're going to look at the physical, tangible results of this hard-won psychological and spiritual freedom, which is an absolutely uncompromising, hugely successful business. So this is Brandy. She's the survivor whose story we've been tracking today. As the sources detail, she escaped human trafficking in her youth, survived being unjustly placed in a psych ward without even speaking the language, and endured decades of coercive control. Yet, despite all of that, she poured her fierce protective intuition into building her brand, Hair Junkie STL. She built a massive, successful business, proving she wasn't just surviving all those years, she was mastering her craft, taking all that immense pressure and turning it into absolute precision. And here is the ultimate manifestation of boundary setting in the real world. In her business, she explicitly lists, "This is for you if," and "This is not for you if." After a lifetime of having her personal boundaries violated over and over, she established an environment where her professional boundaries are absolutely ironclad. And this isn't just clever marketing. It is a literal survival mechanism to protect her peace, protect her energy, and fiercely protect the high-level experience she provides to her clients. Just notice the stark visual contrast here. We see this vibrant, elevated, and fully awake identity that Brandy claims in her professional space today. Her tagline really says it all. The right stylist doesn't just cut hair. They change how you're perceived. Think about the depth of that. She spent her life having her reality and perception distorted by abusers. Now, her entire profession is dedicated to helping other people elevate and align their true outward perception with their inner value. It's amazing. And these glowing 5-star reviews on Gloss Genius, they're the proof. Her clients have literally become her chosen family. These reviews praising the time she takes, her incredible listening skills, her perfectionism, they are the tangible, undeniable proof of her 30-year capability.
Despite a lifetime of people actively trying to sabotage her confidence and steal her energy, she successfully manifested her own reality and built a genuine legacy of excellence.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We've traced this anatomy of liberation, from delayed historical freedom to breaking the mechanics of psychological control, all the way to unapologetic personal authorship. So take a look at your own life. When the noise finally clears and you draw your own boundaries, how are you writing your own unapologetic story? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible material. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.